I've always had a fascination with the mind-brain relationship, ever since I was a kid. How this beige pudding between our ears explains these uniquely human elements of consciousness, thoughts, memories, emotions. It's captivated me my entire life. And how we can capture that and how we can understand that has been a core to my thinking. It's the reason that I studied both biology and theology as an undergraduate. I wanted to, on one side, understand the mechanisms of how the brain works, but on the other, I never wanted to lose my awe for that miracle of the mind, that thing that makes us human. And that's carried forward today. I lead a laboratory that focuses on creating brain-computer interfaces, devices that link machines to the mind to enable people to restore function after a severe neurologic injury. To highlight some of that technology, let me introduce you to a patient that I've gotten to know who's inspired me. His name's Rick, and here he is with his wife, Kim. Kim always referred to him as her Superman, and here he is here. He worked as a paramedic for the Ladue Fire and Rescue. He was there saving lives at the front lines. When people were having a heart attack, they were in a car accident, he was there when they were at their worst. Let me introduce you to Rick's kryptonite. It's a small blood clot that filled one of the arteries that were supplying blood to his brain. And when that happened, a portion of his brain died. Now let me introduce you to Rick 4 years after that stroke. And here he is trying to pick up a marble.
I can't use it against anything else, can I?
No.
Oh,
Sorry. Doing good. Got 10 seconds left. You can count back, so that's the first step. Oh.
In so many ways, it's a heavy, heavy marble. Beyond not being able to pick up that marble, Kim had to help Rick get dressed every day. He couldn't go to the second floor of his house because his arm couldn't reach up to reach the light switch. This rigorously independent man, this Superman, was really laid low by that blood clot. So it begs the question, how do we fix Rick? So there's two words that I want you to remember as we think both about the problem and the solution for how we can fix Rick. One is the word contralateral. This idea that one side of the brain controls the opposite side of the body. The other word that I want you to remember is ipsilateral. This idea that one side of the brain controls the same side of the body. Now, before Rick had his stroke, it was the right side of his brain controlling his left hand, contralateral control. That green area, that's his premotor area, making the plan to move. And that blue area, the primary motor cortex, sends the commands down his brain through his spinal cord to the nerves so he can actually move his hand. But then, 4 years ago, he had his stroke, and that part of his brain died. If you want to have a sense for what it is to lose hand function, how deeply it affects you, wear a sock on your hand for a day. You'll find you can't tie your shoelaces. You're going to have trouble putting your clothes on. All those little things that you take for granted all become a struggle. But our hand is more than just touching the physical world. Because if you ask Rick, what did he want most after that stroke, this is what he'll tell you.
All I really wanted to do was to be able to hold her hand. At the very beginning was to hold her hand.
He wanted to hold Kim's hand. Our hand is also an emotional organ. We don't just touch the world around us, we touch people. So how do we fix Rick? So when we think about fixing injuries in the brain, they're very different from fixing injuries in the body. When you think about something like a broken bone, for instance, you realign that injury in space. You basically put that bone back together with a cast, pins, screws, and eventually those edges grow together. Now, for the brain, it's different. How do you fix a broken brain? You don't put a Band-Aid on it. You can't put stitches in it. You can't put the brain in a cast. Rather than realigning in space, you realign in time. Now, what do I mean by that? So the brain is a fantastic organ that manages extraordinary amounts of information. Different parts of the brain have to work together to manage motor function, speech function, visual function, and they all separate this information out by having different time scales or frequencies. And you can almost think of them as different radio stations. And those different radio stations we call brain networks. Now, we can tap into those radio stations for these different types of information with what we call a brain-computer interface. Now, a brain-computer interface has three parts: sensors, some type of electrode that takes signals from the brain, computation. We convert that electrical activity into information that converts it to an output, like controlling a robotic arm. And when you boil it down, a brain-computer interface is a device that allows you to control a machine with your thoughts alone. Now, originally, people always thought that the brain had to be intact for you to use a brain-computer interface. So it was perfect for people with spinal cord injury or Lou Gehrig's disease, where you couldn't move your body, but your brain still worked. We really set out to challenge that notion. We wanted to use it in stroke where the brain is injured. And so if you ask Rick, even though he can't move his hand, he can't send down that execution from primary motor cortex, he can still imagine moving it. He can still try to move it. And the reason for that is that there's a portion of his brain on the uninjured side called the ipsilateral motor cortex that maintains the motor plan. And now we have some place that we can tap into with our brain-computer interface. But if you remember, brain is kind of like a bunch of radio stations, that different information is carried on different frequencies, or you can almost think of them as different channels. And one of the things that we discovered was that ipsilateral motor signals associated with same-sided limb movements, had a distinct frequency from contralateral signals, opposite-sided movements. They were a higher frequency. So now we have the opportunity, a different location, a specific physiology, to create what we called the IPSI-hand system. And again, a brain-computer interface has three parts: the sensors, electrodes that were on his scalp, computation, a computer that he wore on his forearm, the output, a robotic exoskeleton that moved his fingers in a pincer-like grasp. Here's what it looks like in real life. Here's Rick putting on his EEG headset. These are electrodes recording brain activity through his scalp. There's the computer on his forearm, the robotic exoskeleton. So when he thinks about moving his hand, the brain-computer interface does it for him. But we wanted to take it one step further. And there's another lesson here, that we wanted to not only give him control with the machine, but we wanted to see if we could actually fix Rick. We wanted to see if we could rewire Rick. And there's another lesson here in wiring the brain together, that when things happen, when neurons fire together at the same time, over time, they eventually form new connections. That's called Hebbian learning. And so we not only wanted to have Rick realign his brain in time, meaning he thinks about moving his hand and it moves, but over time, that as he continues to use it, his neural populations are firing in a different way, that new connections are made so that that external circuitry, that brain-computer interface, changes his internal circuitry to rewire and reconnect his hand to a new part of his brain. So let's put all this together. Before Rick had his stroke, his premotor and his primary motor areas were sending signals down his spinal cord, to the nerves, to his hand, and he did the things that we all take for granted. Holding Kim's hand, putting his pants on, tying his shoes, But then, 4 to 5 years ago, Rick, like 800,000 other people, had a stroke, and that part of his brain died. So he couldn't send those signals down to his hand anymore. But one of the things we know now is that he still had maintained the intentions to move his hand, and that was located in that ipsilateral premotor area, that area in green. And by using our brain-computer interface, we could record signals from that area. And so that every time he thought about moving his hand, by using an EEG head cap, we could pick up those intentions. So when he thought about moving it, we would see that specific electrical signature, and that would lead to the movement with his exoskeleton. Now here's the extraordinary part of it. As he continues to use it over weeks to months, a fundamental rewiring happens. He now creates connections with that ipsilateral area of his brain to his hand. So he doesn't need the IPSI-hand system anymore. Now, that's a nice story. It's a lovely video. The question is, does it actually work? So here's Rick, once again, trying to pick up that marble several weeks after using the IPSI-hand system. That was a big moment for Rick. But I'll tell you, it was a big moment for me. 2 weeks later, I see Rick waiting to once again do a motor screening. And he says, Dr. Leuthardt, I just want to tell you, I can put my pants on again. After doing 10 years of research, that meant more to me than any paper, any patent, any award. So I'd given a man his dignity back. And I knew that it wasn't just him, that I had the potential to do that for tens of thousands of people more. And so Rick is now a year out from using the system. He's moved out from that house, and he now lives on a farm with his wife, Kim. He can now pick up vegetables with that hand. He's now working. I'll let Kim describe her experience.
This the last year. When he started, it was in a fist, and he couldn't do anything. And just seeing him come back and being able to hold my hand and seeing the joy in his face from doing the simple things, and so I'm getting my husband back, and every day there's more improvement.
And I think there's a lesson from Rick that I want him to convey.
Every day is Christmas. It's all working. It's just falling into place the way you want it to be, and everybody's big a smile on your face like I've got, because I'm going way, way beyond any thought, including myself, thought we'd ever get this better, much better.
And that lesson is, people are always told after their stroke, if you've lost that function, it doesn't come back in 6 months, it's not coming back. Rick got some hand function back 4 years after his stroke. Now, Rick is not alone. He's not an aberration. He's not a fluke. We've now done this in 10 patients, and 7 of those patients have recovered equally as significant function. And I think what's so interesting, so extraordinary about this approach, it didn't require a drug. It didn't require surgery. This technology enabled Rick's mind to harness the powerful human plasticity to change itself. And I would argue, just as Rick's fate was not set because of that stroke, neither are yours. So often I hear people tell me, I'm not a math person. I'm not an athlete. I can't do this. I could never learn a second language. Most of the people in this audience have not had a stroke or a brain injury, and you don't need a brain-computer interface to change your brain's destiny. All these limitations that we place on our brain are simply cages for our brain's development. Another example. What if somebody told this young man, you're not that good, you're not that athletic, you're not that strong? What if he listened? He wouldn't have trained day in and day out to become this man, Usain Bolt, the fastest man on earth. And I would argue your brain is a muscle. Just as Usain trained his body to exceptional performance, you can train your brain to do amazing things. I remember, on a personal note, I was told as a 5th grader, you're not that smart, Eric. You shouldn't set your sights so high. And I would challenge each of you today. Use your mind. Engage your brain. You have the potential to be more than you ever anticipated. So I would challenge you all today to be more. Be more. Thank you.